Installing and updating software in Linux. A single piece of software is actually composed of many files, source code files, configuration files, and so on. We use the term package to refer to the collection of files that compose that piece of software. And there's two major package managers available in Linux, the Red Hat Package Manager and the Debian Package Manager. They basically operate the same. We're going to talk about their differences, and we'll use the Red Hat Package Manager to install some software on our system. All right, so let's get started. When you go to install a piece of software or a package on your Linux system, it's going to come in one of three formats. It's either going to come as a tar file, an RPM file, or a deb file. A tar file, this tar stands for tape archive. This is kind of like the age-old way to distribute software in Unix and the early days of Linux, and it still works perfectly fine today. Tar file is basically one file, but inside of the tar file are a whole bunch of other files and directories. So when you untar it or you unwrap it, you've got this directory full of stuff that you have to deal with. Now, in that directory might be an executable version of this piece of software, or maybe it's just source code that you're going to have to compile. So it's not necessarily for the novice, but usually it's pretty easy to install software from tar files. The reason not to use tar files in favor of RPM files or deb files is that these guys, these two package managers, make the whole software management process kind of just unifies it all. The software installation, the management of the software, if you have to uninstall software, it keeps track of all this stuff in a database. And the database has information about what packages are installed on your system, what dependencies there are, what packages depend on the package you just installed. That kind of stuff is all maintained in this database. Now, it might seem from the names that Red Hat Package Manager runs on Red Hat systems and Debian Package Manager runs on Debian systems, and that's certainly true. They run on the systems of their namesake here. But theoretically, you should be able to run the Red Hat Package Manager on any Linux installation. You should be able to run the Debian Package Manager on any Linux installation. In practice, you'll find that people don't mix and match these. They don't run the Debian Package Manager on Red Hat systems, and they don't run the Red Hat Package Manager on Debian systems. And the reason for that is, one reason is that they both maintain their own database. So if you start using both package managers to install software on your system, you've lost a little bit of that advantage of having one package manager do all your software installation for you, because then there's two databases. And if you want to get dependency information, you're going to have to look in two places. Now, that's not too big of a deal, but just like I said, in practice, you just won't see people mixing and matching these too often. Maybe if there's just a piece of software out there that doesn't come in the RPM format, it only comes via the Debian Package Manager, somebody might try and use that. Another reason you won't see people using the Debian Package Manager on Red Hat systems and RPM on Debian systems is just because sometimes there's naming conventions on the two distributions that's a little bit different. A library name might be different, or the location of some particular library might be different, or something like that. And then when you go to install some RPM software on a Debian system, it might not work correctly because it's looking for some particular library that is just named different. It might be on there, but it's just named differently than they're expecting. All right, so that's in practice, you just won't see this mixing and matching going on. And usually the Red Hat system, it's used on the Red Hat Package Manager is used on Red Hat systems. It's used on Mandrake systems, which spun off of Red Hat. Linux PowerPC uses the Red Hat Package Manager, and a bunch of other distributions use RPM as its main package manager. The naming convention of an RPM package is package name -abc. So the package name is just something like Apache or Samba or something like that. And then A.B.C is the actual version number of that piece of software. Okay, then there's a -X, and this number here represents the release, the Red Hat Package Manager release of this piece of software. So if this is like blah, blah, blah -1 and then blah, blah, blah exactly the same thing -2, the only difference, the software is no different. The only difference lies in how it names configuration files or what directories it puts the software in, that kind of thing. Okay, it's just how the RPM program deals with the release, not anything to do differently with the software. And then there's an architecture field here, something like this. i386 might be there, which just stands for Intel 386 processors and later it can run on. i586 or i686 you'll see sometimes. And these are the names for, like, the i586 refers to the Pentium, and the i686 refers to the Pentium 2, and so on. Okay, so that's the most common things you'll see in the architecture field. Sometimes you'll see PPC to represent PowerPC. Okay, that's another architecture you'll see. Sometimes you'll see SRC in that field to represent that this is source code inside of here, and you're going to have to compile it. So it's not a pre-compiled package for some particular architecture. It's source code that you're going to have to compile yourself. Now, the commands that you're going to use to do RPM, or to do the Red Hat package management, is the RPM command. Now, the RPM command has, you give it some operations, you can apply some options, and then you tell it what packages you want it to work on. The most common operations you'll see are -I for install, U for update, -Q for query, E for uninstall are probably the most common ones. I just installs a package from scratch, U updates a previously installed package, Q allows you to query that database, so you can get package information, you can get dependency information, that kind of stuff from the database. And then E just uninstalls the package and all of its helper files, like man pages and configuration files and so on. And then there's options that you can give it. So basically, if you're going to install a piece of software and you do the installation, and then it says, sorry, I can't complete the installation because there's some file I'm going to have to overwrite, or there's some other package I'm going to have to overwrite, or something like that. Well, you can use the -force command if you're sure that you want to do that overwriting of other packages or other libraries. Okay? And so if you use the -force command, be aware that some type, if you have to use that to get the software to install, that something's being overwritten, and that might end up breaking something else in your system. So you should make sure that what it's overwriting is not dependent on by anything else, and you can determine that by using the query option in the database. And then there's a -no deps option. So another possibility, when you go to install something, it says, sorry, I can't install because there's these few libraries, or there's this other piece of software that needs to be installed before I can actually install this. All right? So you can force the installation. You can force RPM to do the installation if you use -no deps. You just say, ignore that dependency information and just go ahead and proceed. Now, in my experience, anytime I've ever used this to install a piece of software, it hasn't really worked. I mean, if the RPM says, you know, there's this dependency information out, and then you have to satisfy, and if I force it with -no deps, you know, the installation process goes through and it completes, but it actually didn't install the software correctly. The only time I could imagine this working is if there was some select piece of the software that you just wanted to use this small piece of the software. You didn't want to have the software be fully functional. All right, so if that was the case, you could say -no deps, and hopefully, you know, the dependency information, that might just be for some select piece of the software, and the piece that you use might never use those libraries that it was complaining about. So that might be a possibility there. Now, RPM, the most common version to install a piece of software is to say RPM -ivh package name.rpm. The I does the install, and then the V and the H, what they do is just like print hash marks across the screen as the installation progresses. Kind of just gives you an idea of how far along the installation is. Okay, it's like the poor man's graphical user interface in some sense. So that's probably the most common way to install software with the RPM command. The Debian package manager, on the other hand, is used by Debian Linux and its offshoots like Storm Linux and Corel Linux. The Debian package manager is more highly regarded in the Linux community as a package manager than the Red Hat package manager, and we'll see why in a couple minutes here. You know, just what Debian does that Red Hat doesn't do. Okay, and this is just like the Debian style. It works better, but you know, all the flashy graphical user interfaces and stuff aren't there. But you know, the Debian, like I said before, is all volunteer based. And it's just amazing what this organization puts out in terms of good, solid pieces of software. The commands that for Debian Package Manager are dpackage and apt-get. That's the two basic commands. The options for these commands, for dpackage, you can use -I to install a package, P to purge it, lowercase p to print info about an installed package, and uppercase I to print info about an uninstalled package. All right, so there's some of the more common options. The way that you're going to use this is you're going to get some file. You're going to download some file off the web that's blah, blah, blah.deb. And the naming convention is basically the same as that Red Hat naming convention. It's going to be the name of the software, the version, the architecture, that kind of stuff, .deb. All right, and then you do like dpackage -I .deb, and that will install the software on your system. And this works pretty much just like the RPM command. There's not really very many differences. The subtle differences might be there, but basically this works just like the RPM command. What sets apart the Debian package manager from the Red Hat package manager is this other command down here, the apt-get command. Now, the apt-get command, this works and installs software from remote locations, or updates software from remote locations. And those remote locations that it works from are in a file called sources.list. And this sources.list file, basically what it does is it contains information about trusted websites that you'll download software.